This is actually the topic that was given to me, developing open book tests for online assessment. What should we have and what should we consider? And then we will continue with the Q&A. The outline will be as such. So I'll share with you the brief introduction of open book tests. Why do we have such tests? And how do we develop questions for this kind of tests? And then we're going to look at some examples. I managed to only get one. The other one, I think perhaps any one of you would like to share any of your questions. And then preferably when you submit your questions for a learning outcome as well. Yeah. And then we will have the discussion. Okay. Year 1, we will begin. So regardless of whatever exam it is, whether it is open book assessment or the normal lecture hall high-stake exams, what we need to be clear about what's the purpose of exam. The purpose of exam is actually not to find fault on students, not to fail them, but to actually gauge how much they have gathered or obtained from the semester, from the course that you have taught them. So I reckon that there are 4 elements that we need to consider, especially as what Dr. Nobiha mentioned just now. We are faced with the pandemic, and because of that, all of us are by default, forced into this online assessment, whether we like it or not. So those are the kind of considerations that we need to ask, whether not only whether we know what kind of questions that we need to ask, but whether our infrastructure is ready to allow us to do this kind of assessment without prejudice, in that sense. So intellectually, learning in 21st century should be challenging. What I mean by challenging is that all these years, especially in the 20th century, we have gone through a lot of questions where it requires us to actually regurgitate the information, which means we take notes, we listen, we memorize those notes, and then we write back what our lecturers told us in the lecture and what we have read, right? That to me was the 20th century model, because in the 20th century, we do not have such challenges like what technology has given us. Every time when there's technology, you have pros and cons. You've got good. It's good that you have all this information literally in your fingertips, but the downside is that you have to keep up. The knowledge, it's no longer static in a book. It is evolving. The minute someone discover or add the body of knowledge, whatever that you have learned is already, you've got to relearn and all that. So learning in the 21st century should be challenging, and because it's challenging right now compared to 20th century, that's why the kind of questions that we ask must not be the kind of questions that ask students to regurgitate knowledge. Those kind of questions, you can do that in your activities, in your formative assessment, in your classroom activities, where you want to see whether students are actually getting the information, understand the concepts and all that. But in your final exam questions or in your open book assessment, we have to consider that, to be careful not to have a lot of these memory-based questions, because that's not going to be helpful for our students, because their world is totally different than the 20th century. The 21st century is very challenging. It requires people to use the language rather than to remember, to use the knowledge rather than to remember the knowledge. When you use, you have to know before you're able to use. So it's no longer to know. You have to start thinking about questions that requires them to use the knowledge that they have gathered. So that's intellectual. So the question is learning measured by one's capacity for regurgitating knowledge enough? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. The next is psychological. I'm sure based on your experience, if I were to ask all of you to unmute yourself and tell me, what were your feelings when you enter any kind of examination? I'm sure you will tell me that you suddenly have the urge to go to the toilet, you have butterfly in your stomach. Anxiety and stress is definitely there when you have high-stake exams. Some students who are not, it depends, psychologically, because my area is education psychology, so I don't know. Depends. Certain type of students, because of their personality type, they are very, very easily stressed up. they are prepared, but they're easily stressed up. So much so that they will not be able to perform well because of their stress. It's not that they don't understand. It's not that they can't remember. It's not that they don't pay attention in your classroom. They do. They want to get the results so much that it affects them. All right. So they are not able to control, to be in control in terms of their anxiety and their stress. So that is what we need to ask, whether would you care? Would you do we consider all those things? I remember when my child was sitting for an exam, SAT in England. SAT was when he was, I think he was about 6 years old. He was actually very afraid of the test, and the teacher actually brought him out of the room and gave him a glass of water and asked him to relax before he can and told him that you only write when you are ready to write. So what they're really what really matters to them is your ability to show them truthfully, without putting aside anxiety and stress, what you can actually understand. So our students are very, what should I say? Malaysian students, because we never consider all those things, so they're very lasak lah. Like who cares about your psychological and your stress? You just answer those questions in those time frame, and I will give you the marks accordingly. But we never consider the psychological effect. So my question to us, to me and yourself, is would we care about all the psychological effects on our students? What exactly is the purpose of our exam? The next is contextual. Constraints of meeting face-to-face requires an alternative way to conduct examination, as that's the reason why we have this online assessment and all that. I think looking at our situation right now, although I asked, is there a choice? It somehow feels as if there's no choice, right? And finally, alternatives. That's why we need to have some kind of flexibility, because our world is so ambiguous that we have to become flexible. We have to be adaptable as quickly as possible, and that's why we need to have alternative ways to measure learning, and open book is considered as one of them, although there are many other ways to measure learning, not necessarily exam-based session. And we're not alone, the whole entire world is facing this problem. By May 2020, we have all sorts of research being done to see whether is it good to have an open book or a closed book condition when students are actually sitting for the exam. We have a lot of mixed findings, from this research. And I kind of like this cartoon because this is the notion of, probably, I'm just saying that probably some people think this is the notion. Students would probably think this. When we say this is an open book test, and they say, yay, if you read that snippet, it says, this test is too hard. You know what we need, ma'am? What we need is a good old-fashioned open book test. I'm good at those, because he just wants the answer. But if you have the questions for closed book test, which means the questions are direct, you want them to memorize, is it somebody wrote in the chat, it's Patty something. I didn't get to read the whole name. So yeah, if you have those kind of questions, open book, Peppermint, right? That whole book notion of open book test will be just too brilliant, because I can't remember what the answer is, so I can just open the book and find the answer. So that's why the kind of questions that we ask for an open book test cannot be the same kind of questions that we always create for a closed book test. So all this time when we are doing our high-stake exam, we were designing our test questions, items, based on the situation where students will be removed from all resources. Okay, that was the falsafah behind it. That was the philosophy behind closed book tests. They are put in a situation where they cannot go out, they cannot refer to any materials, and they just have to base on their memory and their understanding in order for them to answer the question. Whereas an open book test, because you already say it is an open book test, naturally, without without understanding the dimensions or the aspects that you need to consider, you would naturally understand that we need to ask a different kind of question. It cannot be the same kind of questions as before. So what is open book exam or test? So what we understand now is usually done remotely by students on their own and able to access their textbook, notes, and other resources. So don't get flustered if you see answers from your students from internet or whatever, because they have all the resources. Now, how you ask the questions will determine whether is it enough for them to just copy and paste the answer, or do they need to do something beyond that. And that's the reason why open book exam is usually meant or would be great for assessing critical analytical thinking of your students. So basically, we're talking about high order thinking skills here. So the questions require students to answer critically and analytically, unlike traditional exams that tend to encourage rote learning and memorizing. Now, even if there were analysis in the high stake exam, you understand that they have to answer within the time frame, which is actually about 2.5 hours for a final exam. So you wouldn't expect them to do a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking beyond just basic analysis that can be done within the time frame. So most when you do your TOS, depending, you will probably have that bell curve thingy where you have the majority will be questions of mediocre difficulty, and you have got 20% or 40% of the 20% each of the very difficult and very easy questions. The very easy questions was initially placed to give them some kind of a warm-up, and the difficult questions is actually to see the difference between good students and poor students or less able students. So, but open book exam is actually meant for really, really questions that allow them to showcase their ability to critically answer the questions and use their analytical skills in order to provide the solution. And of course, regardless of what kind of questions for whatever context, whatever assignments, whatever, if it's a project, a take-home exam, whatever, it must be related to the course learning outcome. But if your course is such that it has the higher level taxonomy, the cognitive domain, that would be brilliant for you to do open book exam. And of course, it has got to be challenging the mind. So what is more important here is not just the what, but the why and how and of course, it has got to be contextually situated. Now, why this is important? Why is contextually situated important? That is the key, If you can have a question that is contextually situated, that's where students will not have the pleasure of finding the answer elsewhere. And if they do so, it will not be enough for what your questions require them to do. To illustrate further, what open book test exam is, basically, it's an opportunity for the students to look through the notes. That's why, technically speaking, open book exam reduces the anxiety. It reduces the anxiety among the students. It reduces the stress among the students, because to them, psychologically, they feel that they have the resources. So all they need to do is just to understand the questions and to respond to the questions well. And if they can't remember formula, or they can't remember certain things, or they just want to be clear, to check whether what they understand is correct, they can still have time to actually look through before they actually answer with more confidence. So technically speaking, because they have opportunity to look through the notes, the anxiety and the stress will be lesser. But of course, students who do not prepare, who just, since it's open book, I don't have to study, I'll just open the book on the day of the exam, they will realize that they don't have time, because whatever it is, we will have a time limit. The time might be different, but there will be time limit for them to answer the questions. So what does it mean by opportunity to look through the notes? So students can look through the notes, because your focus is not to see how well they regurgitate information, but how the information is used in solving a given problem. And of course, they have options. Students might, depending on what kind of students, where your students are located, if they have, and the kind of, the situation in which they are in. So some students, if they are in the first semester students for a degree, probably, they might not even have a laptop, they probably have to wait 1 or 2 semesters before they can own one decent laptop for them to actually do their assignments. So sometimes some students might opt for writing, and some students might want to type. So that there are options. Of course, when they're writing, it's got to be legible. And those questions need to be focused on synthesis, analysis, and application, as I mentioned just now. Open book test is very suitable for higher order thinking skills. Yeah. So it requires them to use those skills, and of course the writing skills, rather than memorization and rote learning, as I said. And if set well, students have little opportunity to cheat or plagiarize. And that's why set well here means to contextualize that, so much so that they cannot find the answer from anywhere. They've got to understand the concept before they can actually answer the question. And as I mentioned just now, the time frame to answer and submit, although it is open book, students still need to answer within the time frame given. And later we will look at what are the considerations that we need to consider. But whatever it is, we still have the time frame. Yeah. So this is what I mean by the time frame. This is for normal assessment test. If it's a true/false items, whether they answer true or false, then it's 20 to 30 seconds per item. Multiple choice, if it's factual, it's just like memorize. The sun is round, or something like that. I don't know. So you that will be true, false. Okay. Multiple choice will be like A, B, C, D, the one that we have options, where they have the distractors as well as the answer. That will be about between 40 to 60 seconds if it's factual. When it's more complex, it will need more time, 7 to 90 seconds. That's where the rule of the thumb is, for every MCQ question, multiple choice question, it will be 1.5 minutes. Yeah. So you will sort of gauge between the easy questions, which require 40 to 60 seconds, and the balance will be for them to attempt the complex questions. And one word fill in questions will be 40 to 60 seconds, matching 2 to 4 minutes, and so on and so forth. We've got short answer. If it's with calculation, it will be longer. If a simple arithmetic word problem, it will be shorter compared to a more extended kind of essays. Yeah, so this is the rule of thumb by Nitko and Brookhart for us to actually use when we are considering how much time is suitable to be allocated for the kind of questions that we have set. However, because this is done in online manner, and understanding that we are not 5G yet, and some places it says 4G, but actually it's not even 4G, in terms of the bandwidth and everything. Having that into consideration, I think we need to also allow for technical time. Now, this one is not really subscribed by anyone. This is just based on my gut feeling in terms of the infrastructure in Malaysia as a whole. So if you talk about if it's a very short answer kind of questions, or maybe if the whole entire exam will, after considering the kinds of questions and all that, the whole entire exam does not take beyond 75 minutes, then which means the answers are not long. It is very short answer kind of questions, or it's very brief essay. So the file is not huge enough. It's okay for them to send it to you. So you just allow 15 minutes technical time. Technical time here means just in case they have problems in terms of submitting and all that. So you have extra leeway in terms of technical time for them to submit the question. Whereas if it's more complex, which requires them to have more words to write, so therefore the file is larger, so that will require 60 minutes technical time, for leeway for them to submit the questions, which means the exam is still 180 minutes, but when I'm giving an example, 180 minutes, but they have 1 hour between the time where they complete to that 1 hour to send it to you, which means they cannot answer anymore. Once they submit, they cannot go back to the answer. But the time frame for their file to reach you will be about 1 hour. So we don't have any problems of students submitting late and all that. And of course, because of certain situations, you still have to have that budi bicara. You still have to consider their consequences, because not all our students are fortunate to be in living in situations in places where they are able to access good internet and all that. So we're done with what basic understanding of what is open book test, and next is actually how do we use this kind of how do we actually encourage people to set up open book exams. So as I mentioned just now, it's suitable for higher level thinking. So it's good for applying or looking at a student's ability to analyze, student's ability to evaluate, students' ability to synthesize, and to show you how critical they are, and of course how creative they are in solving the solution. And when we set up the questions, because of the level of cognitive the taxonomy that we're talking about here. So as I mentioned just now, when it's application, that means when students are required to apply theories, concept, formula that they have learned. When it's analysis, given a stimulus in the form of data or information, a case for them to analyze, information case for them to analyze. So they will have some stimulus. This is where I said you can use already, but in all sections you can use the contextual, but especially for the analysis, the information that you have is not something that you got from a textbook. It's not from a textbook that the exam questions. The open book test should not be from a book, because they can access, and anyone can share the teacher version book to anyone. In terms of evaluation, when students receive the multiple sources that requires them to evaluate, they have A, B, C. They have to decide which one will be the solutions, and they've got to justify their reasons. And synthesis is when students are given a problem. Not only they have to evaluate, but they have to synthesize the information before providing solution, which is they create something, or they propose something that based on the information that they have gathered. And of course, looking at the critical thinking, what is measured is the extent to which the response exemplifies students' ability to form critical thinking and provide creative solution based on a given context. So understanding these levels and the kind of what you require students to do will give you some idea based on your discipline and course that you teach. You will know how best to come up with good open book exam questions, inshallah. Now, this is what I saw, read, or referred in Oxford University. And I kind of like this. And if UTM can do this, that will be terribly brilliant. Which means they have a system, a very structured system that helps students to take online assessment. They actually provide this information. It's like an infographic, but it tells the students what they need to do before and after. And not only that, if you notice, they tell the students when they need to be online, when they can be offline to answer the questions, and when they have to be online again when they submit. Now, this is an example of how they require students to do to answer the online questions in an online manner, which means they have to download the open book exam response template where they respond. That's your answer, basically your kertas jawapan kan, your answer scripts for students to actually answer the questions. So they ask the students to read first their open book exam guides for candidates, and then they ask students to really understand what the students have to read, to do before attempting the questions, and then ask them to download the open book exam response template. Only when they are ready, they start the question. Because the minute they see, when you read this, when you're ready to start your exam, click the link to download your exam paper. The minute you download the exam paper, it's equivalent to turning over your exam paper, which means the minute any students download the exam questions, the system is already ticking. It's already ticking the time frame that the students have to answer. So I think if our HEA is ready for this, then we are okay in doing online assessment. So basically, there is a place, a platform where students will submit their answer scripts when time is up. So basically, when they submit, that means it's just like time's up. The time will indicate, and then they will have to submit the information. And of course, they will receive auto-generated response. Yeah. Now, this is, remember I told you about the options, that some students would opt for handwritten and some students would opt for typing the answer. So, you're thinking that Malaysia, because of the context where the students are in, and this is actually United Kingdom. United Kingdom, I don't think they have any problems. Even in the Isle of Wight, they still have access to internet. In an island, they still can have access to internet. So, but they're giving options for students, because some students prefer writing, where they're, seperti air yang mengalir, their ideas flow very well compared to when they're typing. So they allow students to do that. And again, they have a specific instruction for those who are actually doing the those who opt for handwritten response. So they will have to download an app, that Microsoft Office Lens app. Maybe the people from the computer science can let me know whether perhaps these particular apps will help read whatever handwriting you have. It will transform to something that's legible for the examiners to check. That's my gut feeling, what this app is all about. So again, probably somebody said maybe they ask for handwritten to avoid copy and paste. Well, actually, if students want to copy and paste, if they actually want to plagiarize, they will do all sorts of things. They can write quickly, but basically for this Oxford way of doing things, is they're allowing the students to feel at ease when they are answering the questions, and perhaps this app is actually helping the reader. It helps to transform any kind of handwriting into proper, legible answers for the examiners to be able to mark well. And they also told, they also say that the maximum file must be certain megabyte and all that. And again, they tell you when you should be online and when you should be offline, and when you should be online again. And I had looked through the open book exam guide for candidates. So I looked through at the open book exam guide. I was very intrigued in number 12. Number 12 tells about well-being during exam. It says navigating exams can be difficult, but the university is committed to supporting you as you engage with the process. Your particular exam-related issues and challenges may be the same as those of your peers, or they may be different. But whatever it is that makes the exam experience difficult for you, we would like to support you to address the challenges of exam as effectively as you can, so that you can feel proud of yourself and positive about how you approach the process. So they also provide links, for counseling services, or even IT, because this one is actually the one related to well-being. But there's another one also. They say if you have any problems, because you might not have a computer that is compatible and all that, so they ask the students to actually contact the IT in advance before sitting for the exam. So I think while I was talking just now, I saw some people had very bad experiences of open book exam. It's probably because, the well-being was never taken taken into consideration. Remember, I told you about the psychological aspect that might influence our students' capability to actually tell you what they really have understood and gathered from your course. That is, I think, more important. And I kind of like how they were very concerned about trying to get the students to feel proud in expressing what they understand, because that's really what matters. So how do we develop the questions for open book tests? There are some considerations that you need to consider. Yeah? The first and foremost will be your learning outcomes. You need to be clear. In learning outcomes, and the table of specification is not there for ISO purposes or audit purposes. It's there for a very good reason. You need to be clear what the levels of taxonomy that you're talking about here, so that you can design those questions. Yeah, you can devise and assess those questions in tandem with the level that your course is supposed to be geared at. So the questions is basically to devise, to assess interpretation and application of knowledge, comprehension skills, critical thinking skills, rather than recall, if you want to do open book tests. Yeah. In terms of context, you have to try to use cases or problems based questions as a stimulus, so that those contextual situations which would actually help the students to respond differently from what they can gather from their resources. And I'm sure for those who have experienced open book exam, you will realize that the kind of questions that were posed to you are not recall questions. They were thinking questions. It requires you to think. It's not enough for you to know, but it's more about how you need to now use what you know to solve the problem. So similarly, you need to provide those kind of context in terms of answering the questions. Okay, so once you've got the context done, you know what the level of learning outcomes, you've designed your questions well. Next is actually to see whether you've got to do the quality bit. You've got to devise to make the clear and unambiguous questions so that you can avoid confusion. So that's why we have vetting sessions. And sometimes people don't take this vetting session seriously. They send their friends to vet the questions for them. So I think as lecturers, academics, we need to be serious with our work. When it comes to questions, we really, really need second opinion, third opinion, very good critical friends to tell us whether those questions are clear, those questions are related to the learning outcomes, because we don't want to have this short sendiri syndrome, the triple S syndrome. We feel as if we know what we are talking about here because we are the expert in the field. But sometimes even the expert in the field do make mistakes. Might learn a thing or two from their friends. So the vetting session is very, very important in order for us to make sure that the kind of questions that we pose to our students are valid questions and reliable questions and fair. It's related to what we have taught. It's related to the level of the learning outcome, and it's feasible for students to actually answer. And the next thing that we need to also consider will be the time allocated. Need to have time limit and must be appropriate. And although it's similar to the closed book exam, how complex it is, you also have to add the technical time in order to avoid any possible technical issues. Okay, what is the process? The process before the product. Before we can actually come up with the good questions, this is the process, which you are very familiar with, I'm sure. So the first thing is actually to understand the course learning outcome and understanding that the test is the exam questions are related. The time for the topics. Time for the topics here means the rule of the thumb when you're talking about assessment or coming up with good questions is how much time have you spent on that course learning outcome and related to the topics. I'm sure what I'm talking about here is when you have your syllabus, you will have allocated time based on the CLO as well as the topics, right? So you need to find out how much time have you allocated for that CLO and those topics in order to determine the weightage the time that you and the number of questions that you should have for the respected CLO and topics. So that's how you come up with the table of specification or exam blueprint, or long time ago they call it jadual spesifikasi ujian, and now it's called jadual spesifikasi item. So table of specification helps you to plan not only questions related to the levels according to the CLO, but also it helps you to determine the time given or allocated for students to answer. It will gauge you the rule of thumb, how much time you need to provide to your students. Next, of course, is to design the test questions, and then you vet the questions, as I mentioned just now during the vetting session. That's for quality assurance. And then you'll prepare of course, when you're doing before you do your vetting, you must make sure that you have already got your answer key. So some of the questions, if you're doing project based, which is not open book test, but let's just say if it's an assignment, a project based or alternative assessment, you've got to be ready with your rubric. Those rubric needs to be vetted too. Administer, of course, you need coordination from various stakeholders. I don't know how UTM does this, but I'm sure A192, it was terrible because we were in the middle of everything. We were in the middle of a normal life, teaching our students in a face-to-face context, when suddenly the world stood still, and overnight the lecturers became higher education. The lecturers themselves became hal ehwal academic. I jokingly put it, because during A192, I'm sure is the lecturer who came up with the questions. They administered the test by giving to the students the questions. They received the scripts from the students, and they are the ones who are marking those scripts. So literally, they were the hal ehwal academic. Now, for 201 and onwards, we cannot have that kind of model anymore. We need to have a structure, just like what Oxford does, where they have a structure where IT does its part, the academic affairs does its part, and the lecturer does its part. So the one who's actually giving the questions is no longer the lecturers. There is a system which somebody which is actually the academic affairs will control. The academic department will control all the exam questions, and they will just like how they do the scheduling for each exams, they will schedule those exams for the students. That then it will be a truly great online assessment, to ensure smooth running and quality of governance, because we need to make sure that we have good governance when it comes to exam administration. We also have to understand the context in which we are in. We're not that advanced yet, and it requires all of us to actually help each other, and hopefully somehow or other, if this is going to be the new norm forward for 21st century onwards till the 22nd century, then the system must be in place. For now, it can be ongoing, but the good governance has got to be there. Improve. Once you've already done the questions and got the scripts and everything, the course has not ended. The next thing that you need to do is to do item analysis and item discrimination, so that there is a clear evidence of which questions that can be used, and you can put it in the item bank, and which ones that needs to be revised or which ones that needs to be removed. So all these considerations need to be done. So do not for the longest time give questions that you have never did any analysis on it, because if there's an error, that means if that item is a bad item, until you retire, you will never know whether your students is actually was just, it was fair for the students, because of your negligence in doing item analysis and item discrimination. So again, what are the things that needs to be considered? The course learning outcome, yes. Topics covered, thinking about the context, the clarity in questions, access to assessment. Now this one is the next question. This is actually the once everything is in place. I mean, you've done your part. Now you got to find out whether students are able to access to do online assessment. So this is fundamental and needs to be addressed, because what's the point of having online assessment if students cannot get access to internet, good internet, right? So those are the considerations that you need to consider first. And of course, collaboration is what I meant by earlier. That means various parties in the university have to take into consideration in order for us to not only administer it well, but once after we've completed, we get people to actually look at our items in order for us to ensure that the items are good. And if it's an essay question and you're the only one teaching the course, that's fine. But if you are teaching the same course with other 10 lecturers, then moderation has got to be done. So usually if you've got, I think the best practice is if you've got more than one people teaching the same course, you would have one course coordinator, right? So the course coordinator will select after the exam is over, before anyone does any marking. The course coordinator will take samples, exact samples from the low, the average, the high students, basically by looking at the answer scripts to see whether to gauge that notion, and then allow everybody to have a go with the same scripts so that everybody can understand the standard, right? What is categorized as low, what is categorized as middle, and what's categorized as high when marking, before marking. So this is what we call moderation session before marking begins. And another good best practice is never take your own group scripts to mark, because we tend to remember our students' names or our students' matrix number. For the sake of validity and reliability and fairness, it would be great to mark other students so that we are equal in terms, and we are very objective when we are marking. Now, if we have good system that allows for online assessment, then so be it. Then you can actually do such things. Some have remote proctoring system where they can actually look at the eye movement. They can actually look at how the students are actually answering the minute the students using the same computer. If you download that app, the app can actually detect whether students are actually browsing through other websites and all that. So if you have such things, then of course, by all means, do the online assessment. But if you don't, then you have to consider having good questions. When you have all this proctoring system, you can have the lower level kind of questions, the one that requires factual response. The CLO is related to analyzing force and free external and internal flow convection, heat transfer using various correlation, whatever. Yeah, but basically it's actually analyzed. Yeah. So this is the kind of question. So what can you tell me about the questions? Understanding now the kind of considerations that you need to have when you are doing open book exam. Perhaps the question is a good question because you have context, right? You have included the context and the cognitive level, and you found students copying and pasting the concept, but they're not answering the next question, a bigger portion of the question, which is actually the problem, right? And not addressing the context. So that's why, just like when you are teaching in normal, when we have the final exam, the normal final exam, when I say normal final exam, you all understand, it's the high stake exam where everybody is in the hall. Now, before we always begin with the end in mind, right? We kind of know already where we're where the standard should be, right? Where students should be. So in our normal everyday classes, we will have short activities that will reflect what they will expect in the final exam, because you cannot be teaching them, lecturing them and expect them to solve problems at the end, because your course is analyzing. And that's where the constructive alignment is very crucial here. The minute you have at the end of this course, students will be able to analyze in your during class time. You have to give them opportunity for them to analyze the questions, researching and getting information from everywhere to understand the skills that is needed, because those very skills will be used when they are answering your exam questions. Sebab itulah, when we always don't think that way. We always teach. I got no time lah to do these activities. I just going to lecture. They're going to take notes. At the end, they are going to answer my questions, and that questions is asking them to analyze. And they, for their lifetime, in that 14 weeks of your 14 weeks, right? Sama kan? 14 weeks of the undergraduate course in that particular semester, never in the class they had a chance to analyze. You were doing the analysis for them. Perhaps you gave them one situation and you show them how to answer the questions. That means you gave the questions, you analyze it for them, you show how to analyze. They, on the other hand, never had the chance to analyze. What they did was just copying and writing exactly verbatim what you said. So don't be angry, and at the end, that's precisely the skills that they can do. Copying and writing verbatim what they have gathered from your class. And that's the reason why they never got to that level of analyzing, because we didn't help them at all, the skills to analyze. So this is the thing. Never what you cannot tell your students is the actual question, but what you need to teach and educate your students is the skills that they require based on the course learning outcome in the course, for them to have a goal before they actually will be measured. So if you had done that activities in the classroom, given the context, maybe a short version of the context, just especially once you finish a few topics based on the CLO, you combine all the topics and give them one case study. So that provides the context, right? So you allow them to have a go at analyzing based on the information that you gave in the case study and all that. So then they will know, oh, this is how it is, or this is interesting because I'm actually trying to help this particular company to solve this problem. So the kind of questions that you will pose in the open book test will be that very nature, and they will be excited to tell you what they have found, because they have received feedback from you. So those kind of activities that you do in the classroom, that's what we call formative assessment, where you provide feedback to the students how well they were able to analyze given the case study that you have given during the class time. You are guiding them. They know now, okay, I wasn't clear. I didn't explain. I just wrote the formula. I just tell them the definition of the concept, but I didn't tell them how is that concept related to the problem and why that particular concept is important for us to understand that particular problem. If you had done that, then I'm sure students don't have time to copy and paste. If the question is such that they have to read and understand and respond, the only resources that they're going to refer is when they are not sure, like theory A or theory B. Now, I'm not sure about theory A or theory B. So they just want to have a quick look to decide whether is it theory A or theory B. So once they are clear that theory B is the way forward, then they are going to express. And how they analyze, your task is actually to analyze measure how well they analyze. In this case, how well do they analyze the question? The multiple choice questions and the essay kind of questions, the time frame will be different, right? The time frame for multiple choice questions, as I said, in normal circumstances, it will be the rule of thumb is 1.5 minutes for each question. So if you've got 50 questions, you just time the 50 times 3/2 lah. Then you know already the time frame that you should allocate for doing the exam. Now, if it's multiple choice questions, you don't, again, the technical time, because it's not more, 50 will be what? It will be 25 times 3. It will be about 75, right? 75, right? 75 minutes.
Yes.
Right? If it's, okay.
Minutes, yes.
Okay, so if it's 75 minutes, not more, remember I told you just now? It's not more than 75 minutes, 15 minutes je untuk siapa nak submit to you and get back. Usually they submit saja, you know, they click submit, no more going back, looking at the questions anymore. They can, before they submit, within the time frame of 75 minutes, they can actually go back and look at their questions to check, to double check if they have time. But to submit to you will be very quick, depending on their data. We are only taking that into consideration. Some students might have that technical problem, so you have 15 minutes for them to submit. But basically for MCQ, compared to essay kind of questions, essay questions will require them to spend more time reading the instruction, understanding the instruction, and responding to the instruction, because the question is not clear cut. How shall I say not clear cut? The questions require them to justify, to show their understanding of how they analyze the problems, to relate, to give examples. MCQ tak? MCQ is a matter of choosing ABCD. But I'm not saying
to this time frame, we at UTM we suggest it this way, because we are quite concerned about students' internet reliability and their connectivity and all. So what we suggest to the academic staff is that kalau you have a 3 hours punya exam, normally you have final exam of 3 hours. We ask you to divide that into half. Contohnya, so for example, for 3 hours, you have to carry out your final exam in 2 parts. So the first part is 1.5 hours, and then another part 1.5 hours. For toilet break and things like that. So that is, I think, is for all the academic staff here as well. So it still relates and it's still relevant to what Prof. Fauziah is trying to tell us today. On top of, you have to divide your 3 hours final exam into half. That 1.5 hours that you have divided has to also add this technical time allowance for them to upload and download dia punya exam questions or exam answers. So this 15 minutes technical time is for that technicals. That is not included in 1.5 hour for answering the question. Jadi dia sebenarnya, maybe if normally it is 3 hours, so maybe we can have up to maybe 4 hours kan, kalau kita ada a break in the middle kan. So that's what I'm trying to convey as well to all the academic staff, that it is still aligned with what Prof. Fauziah has been trying to explain. So the technical time, we still have to divide. We advise you to divide the 3 hours into half and then add another technical time for on top of the 1.5 hours after the break. We try to practice that, Prof, in UTM.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's actually helping the students to have some form of well-being. They had a break, they can go to the toilet, they can have a cup of water if they feel so uncomfortable. So they have that time frame. And you didn't tell them the questions that's coming in the next session, you know. So it's still fair to the students. It's still 1.5. It's a 1.5. You know, it's a 70.
Final exam, yes.
It's 1.5 minutes of final exam, and then there's another break, and then another 1.5 session.
Final exam section.
Yeah, that's fine. But what I'm trying to tell, what was it, Dr. Nur Hidayah just now, in terms of the multiple choice questions, you can still do it. The time given for the multiple choice question and the time given for essay will be different, as I mentioned just now. You can have 50 questions for multiple choice questions, and it's just about 75 minutes. But if an essay, you probably need 3 questions, and that's good enough for a whole entire 1.5 session, if the essay is is related to the task and the context to which it is meant for.
How do you how can we guide ourselves in giving this time allocation, Prof? Is that by the marks that we gave? For example, if we have question just now like 20 marks, so do we estimate like about 20 minutes for questions that has 20 marks, that carry 20 marks? Can we do that? Or how do we go about that? Because I see later on, if all of us is going to vet these questions, we ourselves need some guidance on whether this is okay, or you are allocating too much time on these question, things like that. How do we guide ourselves in giving in allocating time for essay type of question? Is it okay by marks?
To me, when it comes to assessment, I'm a practitioner more than an expert. I'm a practitioner. I practice. That's all. To be fair, but whatever that I do, I always think, how can I ensure that fairness has been considered when I'm designing my question. So what I think is most important is actually to look at your table of specification, meaning if your table of specification was designed in such a manner that you take into consideration the number of hours spent for the CLO and those topics, then that gives you a weightage. Weightage here means like macam kata lah 25%. So 25% of the total 100 marks must be related to that particular CLO, which means then you have to decide that particular CLO gathers which topics. So those topics, either they combine, kalau they combine, then the whole 25% can be meant for that particular question. But if it's broken to subsections, like topic 1, topic 2, topic 3 related to CLO 1, and it's 25%. So then you kena bahagilah pula CLO 1 tu berapa persen, CLO 2 tu berapa persen, CLO 3 berapa persen. All this information should be in your syllabus already. That's why sometimes in your syllabus you will write CLO 1 and 2, 2 and 3, kan? Dia dah ada dia punya combination that particular topic ada 1 and 2. So maksudnya dekat situ the topic 1 tu berapa, dia macam setengah-setengah lah. It's not 1. It's 0.5. I know, as I always share this with anybody, they will say, oh, that's so technical. I say, well, I am trying to be fair so that I know if my students ask me, why are the questions so difficult? Not difficult. The questions are difficult because the course is difficult.